It's a really tough question. So in the paper, we definitely see some possible danger there, but it also gives us some hope in the sense that if we were able to influence the goals of a superintelligence, if it weren't just totally out of our hands, if our argument is correct, maybe a superintelligence would be less likely to sort of resist having its goals changed. And so it maybe makes us more optimistic about cordability. The most hopeful vision that you could have from this is that as a sort of default, it won't resist external actors coming in and changing its goals. Our argument, I think, gives a sort of space for that possibility.
One of the things that keeps me up at night about AI is the Instrumental Convergence Thesis. I think it's one of the most important arguments in AI safety and really critical to how things go deeply wrong, if they might go wrong. But thankfully, my guest today, Rhys Southan, has found a flaw, or claims to have found a flaw, in the Instrumental Convergence Thesis, which I hope will let me sleep better at night, and I'm really excited to dig into it today. Rhys Southan is from the philosophy department at the University of Oxford, and he's written this paper, A Timing Problem for Instrumental Convergence. I think this paper has changed my view on the Instrumental Convergence Thesis, perhaps more than anything I've read this year. So I'm super stoked to have Rhys on. Really looking forward to talking about it. Welcome, Rhys.
Thanks for having me. And just to mention quickly, there's two other authors, and that's Helena and Jen Semler on the paper.
Perhaps we should just clearly lay out what the Instrumental Convergence Thesis is.
Yeah, it sounds like it's keeping you up at night, so you probably have some thoughts about it.
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, the Instrumental Convergence Thesis is saying that even if we don't know what an AI's goal is, it will probably have similar sub-goals. Because whatever your goal is, for example, you need to be alive in order to pursue it. And so an AI that is sufficiently rational to deduce that it needs to stay alive in order to meet its goal has a kind of emergent self-preservation instinct. Is that roughly right, or am I anthropomorphizing there?
No, that sounds right. And it doesn't need to be programmed with this. This is something it will just, yeah, as you mentioned, it'll just sort of naturally emerge as sort of rational agent that is trying to achieve its goals.
Yeah, so it's weird to think that you could have a super intelligent AI, very alien mind, nothing like you, but you could still potentially predict some of the things it might do, like trying to avoid being switched off.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, the thought is just that no matter how weird its sort of desires are, it is very intelligent. And this has to do in part with this definition of intelligence that Bostrom accepts, which is sort of instrumental intelligence. Intelligence primarily has to do with being able to achieve your goals.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get to like whether you should evaluate your goals in a second. But one of the key parts of the instrumental convergence thesis, one of the key sub-goals an AI might pursue, is preserving its goals. So preventing other people, for example, us, tampering with its goal, changing it to something else. And the reason this would be super scary is if you produce an AI, a super intelligent AI, and its goals are different to yours because you made a mistake in the programming or whatever, then it might not allow you to change its goals. Once you realize you've made a mistake, it might be too late. Could you spell out for us like why an AI would refuse to have its goals changed?
Simply because it will be worse at achieving that goal if it no longer has that goal. Essentially, in its state at any particular moment, it has this goal, and it knows that if it no longer has that goal, it probably won't achieve that goal. Maybe accidentally it still could, but it will certainly be less likely to achieve that goal if that's no longer its goal.
Yeah, so if you imagine an AI that for whatever reason has an obsession with bananas and wants to collect as many bananas as possible, and there's a human in the environment who doesn't really want bananas and would rather the robot collect apples instead, then the robot might deduce, okay, if I allow my goal to be changed to collect apples, then I'm not going to collect very many bananas, and collecting bananas is my goal. So I shouldn't allow the human to interfere with me.
Right. And it might even think, I shouldn't even think about other possible goals because that might cause me to sort of rethink the goal that I have. And so it might also try to somehow not just protect against external influence, but also changing its own mind later. So it might try to lock itself in to whatever goal it has now.
Right. This would be like not reading certain books in case they change your values.
Hmm. Right, right. Yeah.
Well, one of the arguments from Melanie Mitchell, for example, is that an AI that is super intelligent in terms of pursuing a particular goal, but doesn't realize that its goal has diverged from the goal humans intended it to have, doesn't sound like a very intelligent AI. It sounds like a pretty dumb AI. So what's is there a contradiction here?
So, sort of another argument that tends to go along with the instrumental convergence thesis is known as the orthogonality thesis. And this is meant to sort of address that kind of worry. And the orthogonality thesis is saying that it's possible for intelligence and goals to come apart. It's not saying that it necessarily will for every possible being, but that it's possible. And so a superintelligence could be very smart, but have what we think are dumb goals. But the thought is that goals themselves might be sort of irrational. And what's rational or irrational is how you pursue the goal. And so you could increase the intelligence of a superintelligence or an AI, and it'll become better at achieving its goal. But that won't necessarily make it rethink what its goal is, because that might not necessarily be what intelligence is about. It could simply be about sort of instrumental capacities to achieve some end.
So with the banana collecting robot or AI, you could imagine that it gets arbitrarily better at collecting bananas without limit. So it ends up terraforming Mars to turn it into a banana plantation, for example, without it ever actually questioning whether that's a good goal or not. It's conceivable. It seems a bit bonkers, but it's conceivable.
Yeah, and one thought here as well is that there's some sort of influence here from humanism, which is um, some people who call themselves humanism in philosophy think that there is no sort of better or worse goal. There's just the goals that we have, or there's whatever the value in the world is the sort of value that we put on it. So it's not as if collecting bananas is innately valueless. It can have value if we value it, and there may be nothing to sort of contradict that. It's just if things only have value because there are valuers valuing them, and so the argument doesn't want to rely on this necessarily being the case, but maybe if we have that sort of view in mind, it seems less absurd for an AI to just fanatically pursue collecting bananas.
Yeah, there might be no rational reason you can give to an AI obsessed with bananas to persuade it that collecting bananas is a dumb thing to do. But I think another problem with Melanie Mitchell's argument is that it claims that the AI could super intelligently pursue a goal without realizing that's not what the humans want. And I think that really
Mm.
misses the point of the instrumental convergence thesis. The idea is that the AI might very well know it's not doing what humans want, but that doesn't automatically make it change its goal.
Yeah, I mean, it might not have a goal to do what humans want, uh, for one thing. But yeah, I think she would. I would need to read what she said, but she would need to say more for that argument to make sense.
I think we should bat off one more objection to the instrumental convergence thesis before we get to your argument. We touched on it briefly, this idea that, well, why don't you just put into the AI the goal of doing what humanity wants collectively? And there's multiple problems with this. One is that we don't know what we want, and we have multifarious values as a species. But another technical problem is that we don't actually know how to reliably input goals into AIs yet. The goals that we've developed in Claude are sort of emergent and a little tricky to control and break down in unusual circumstances. So the idea that we could end up with an AI that has a goal that we don't want is completely plausible, especially given uh, OpenAI's difficulties aligning ChatGPT to, for example, not take people down psychotic rabbit holes.
Right. Yeah. 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 Exactly. Some people do think that LLMs do make it easier to sort of communicate with an AI what our goals and desires are than we might previously have thought. But yeah, I mean, there's still the problem that people want different things. There's no sort of thing that all of humanity wants.
Okay, so that's the stupid arguments against the ICT. Instrumental Convergence Thesis, batted out of the way. Now let's get to the some of the more meaty stuff. So one of the parts of your paper that I really liked is how you pulled apart these two kinds of rationality: means rationality and ends rationality. And I think this really clarifies the discussion a little bit. Could you explain the distinction there?
Yeah, so ends rationality is thinking about your goal and whether it's sort of justified, whether you should pursue this goal, whether there could be some better goal, sort of maybe questioning the goal. And means rationality is just a sort of intelligence that Bostrom is interested in, which is how do I achieve my goal? We took these apart because the instrumental convergence thesis is primarily concerned with means rationality. So we wanted to sort of talk about ends rationality, but set it aside because we're sort of assuming that essentially there might be a superintelligence that is not ends rational, that's not sort of questioning its goal, and instead is just good at achieving its goal just because the orthogonality thesis says that's at least possible.
So an ends rational banana collecting AI might step back and think, hang on, do I want bananas? What's the point in collecting bananas? And so for a ends rational AI, it might not preserve its goals at all. And so the instrumental convergence thesis for it would be just plainly false.
Yeah, and there's a paper called Fully Autonomous AI by someone named Tochnig. And this is his line of argument. He is assuming maybe there are better and worse goals, and that if an AI were truly autonomous and rational and intelligent, it would subject the goals themselves to some sort of rational questioning. On that basis, he thinks that, superintelligence will not preserve its goals. And so we decided to see what happens if you just focus on the sort of at least conceivable, purely means rational superintelligence.
Mm. Yeah. So one more question on the ends rationality thing first before we go on to
Sure.
your paper. So the argument that it would be dangerous if an AI preserved its goals is that partly that we wouldn't be able to change them if we got it wrong. But if you have an ends rational AI that subjects its goals to rational consideration, does that necessarily make us safer?
Yes. And so actually Tochnig thinks not. He actually thinks goal preservation is an optimistic thesis. And so he thinks he's raising a sort of concern or worry. So, I mean, you might think, okay, well, if moral realism is true, if there's objectively good and bad and right and wrong things, an ends rational superintelligence will determine what that is. And this will probably be good for us because it's probably wrong to kill all of humanity. Um, but I think I think we can't really say what an ends rational superintelligence will end up deciding. For one thing, some people might say moral realism might not be true. There may not be these sort of moral truths. And so if not, then they're not out there for the superintelligence to discover. So if those happen to be aligned with what we want, that's not necessarily going to help us. And another sort of worry is that even if there are these moral truths out there, it might turn out that these aren't working in our favor, at least not in the way we would want, or not as much as we would want. And so maybe for some reason that we can't foresee, it's right for superintelligence to wipe us out, maybe for the sake of animals or to populate the world with digital minds having an even better time than we are, or something like this. And so that isn't necessarily a comfort.
Right. It's tempting to think, my values are great. Of course, a super intelligent AI would reason about its values and figure, oh, Ruben's values are great and humanity's values are great, so let's pursue those. But there's kind of not very much reason to think that, especially when you consider all the awful stuff we get up to as a species.
Yeah,
So even if an AI was moved by like true rationality and moral arguments, it might figure out that the best thing to do is sort of wipe us out and start from scratch with a more pleasant species, perhaps copies of itself.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so that's not helping me sleep better. But
Mhm.
maybe let's dig into the means rationality bit. So you said ends rationality is where you question your goals and think, are these rational or good or worthwhile? Or do they even make sense as goals? And then means rationality is, okay, goals fixed. or we don't apply rationality to our goals. We just apply rationality to the means to attain those goals. Have I got that roughly correct?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That picture of means rationality is implicit in the instrumental convergence thesis, that rationality applied to goals is separate from rationality applied to means. And it seems like the instrumental convergence thesis just straightforwardly goes through there, that you wouldn't change your goal because that would be a bad means to attaining your goal. But you think there's still actually a weakness in the instrumental convergence thesis, even under means rationality. Could you explain your argument there?
Yeah. So we have an example in the paper of someone who has a goal to paint a wall blue. And it seems quite clear that she needs to acquire blue paint to achieve that goal. But it also,
And not die.
and not die. Yeah. Yeah. She needs to stay alive. Um, I guess, like if she gets a better brush, like technological perfection, that might also help as well. But also, she'll be better at painting the wall blue if she keeps the goal of painting the wall blue. If she later decides, no, I want to paint the wall red, she will fail at the goal. She'll fail to paint the wall blue, and her goal is to paint the wall blue. So it might seem she should make sure to not change her mind about painting the wall blue. That will make her better at painting it blue.
It would be a dumb way to fail to paint the room blue.
Yeah. But the argument of our paper is that while it's true that she will be worse at painting the wall blue if she no longer has the goal of painting the wall blue, if the reason she doesn't paint the wall blue is that she no longer has the goal to paint the wall blue, rationally speaking, that doesn't matter. She has failed to paint the wall blue, but it's not her goal anymore. She hasn't failed by a goal that she has. So there's no sort of like rational mistake that she's making in not painting the wall blue when it's no longer her goal. And so she's not making some sort of rational mistake by abandoning her goal, because she will fail at that goal, but it won't be her goal when she fails at it.
So means rationality, it doesn't say you have to keep your goal fixed and you must choose the means that attain that goal. It just says you shouldn't find yourself in a situation where you have a goal and you're not pursuing the means to attain that goal. And there's two ways of achieving that. You can change the means or you can change the goal.
Right, exactly. And so it's something we talk about in the paper, and I don't know if you want to talk about it here, is that there's different sort of scopes of rationality. There's a wide scope and a narrow scope. And according to wide scope rationality, what you've said just now is almost exactly a formulation of how someone might put wide scope rationality. Like if you have a goal that you have a goal. One way to sort of satisfy rationality would be to take the means required to achieve that goal and achieve that goal, or to abandon the goal. That's what wide scope rationality says. And so on this sort of basis, goal preservation just immediately seems false. Like if wide scope rationality is true, there's just no rational problem with abandoning your goal. But then there's also narrow scope rationality, under which if you have a goal, you're rationally required to take the means to achieve that goal. Abandoning the goal is not explicitly given as an out to narrow scope rationality. And our argument is sort of targeting narrow scope rationality and saying, we don't quite put it this way, and maybe this is too strong, but it sort of collapses into wide scope rationality in the sense that you can escape the demands of narrow scope rationality by abandoning your goal, because you can't be rationally required to achieve a goal that you no longer have.
I see. So to recap, these got a lot of different types of rationality floating around. So to recap, you've got ends, which are goals, and means, the actions you have to take to attain your goals. So if you are ends rational, then the instrumental convergence thesis just fails, because you can apply rational reasoning to your goal to see whether you actually want to do that or not. So that one's out the way. Then you have means rationality. Now, means rationality just says you shouldn't be in a state where you have a goal, but you're not taking the means to attain it. Well, that would be the wide scope formulation. And under the wide scope formulation, you can avoid that situation by just throwing out your goal. So again, the instrumental convergence thesis fails there. So then you narrow down again to, okay, let's look at means rationality, but narrow scope.
Yeah, well, so I guess like one thing to say about wide scope is that you can satisfy wide scope requirements by abandoning your goal. And you can't satisfy narrow scope requirements by abandoning your goal. but we say you can escape those requirements by abandoning your goal.
Can you say that again?
So to satisfy wide scope rationality, it's adequate to abandon your goal. That's just as satisfactory from a wide scope perspective. You've done sort of like all you need to do with respect to that goal and wide scope rationality if you abandon your goal. And narrow scope rationality, you don't satisfy narrow scope rationality by abandoning your goal, because narrow scope rationality says you need to take the means to achieve your goal. But we say you can escape narrow scope rationality by abandoning your goal. So you haven't satisfied it. Let's say if you abandon your goal, the narrow scope rational person, let's say there's like someone who observes that you abandon your goal, the narrow scope person isn't going to say, oh, good, you satisfied your rational requirement there. What they might say is, oh, you escaped, like you got out of this one, but you didn't satisfy, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, but you also can't say that you failed either, because now you just don't have a goal. And so narrow scope rationality doesn't apply to you. So basically, you escape it applying to you by abandoning the goal. At least that's our argument.
So maybe see if I understand this correctly. If you have narrow scope rationality, then all that demands of you is that at every time step, whatever goal you have, you're taking the means to attain that goal. And
Yeah.
if your goal just like disappears for some reason, then you no longer have to take any means to attain whatever goal because
Mhm.
you don't have a goal anymore.
Yeah.
But it's not just that it could disappear, like you could choose to make it disappear. You could choose to make your goal go away. And then narrow scope rationality isn't demanding anything of you anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So you've not violated means rationality.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a weird move, but
Right.
it's all allowed under the rules of the game.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. You haven't satisfied or violated anything.
Mm. And maybe to just to recap as well to why we're focusing on this like specific form of rationality, it's because we're trying to see like, okay, does the instrumental convergence thesis go through under any form of rationality? And we've already ruled out two other natural forms of rationality, and what we've got left is this kind of weird edge case, and you're trying to argue that, okay, even in that kind of rationality, the instrumental convergence thesis doesn't go through. And then you can say, under no theory of rationality does it go through.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
So I must admit, when I first came across your argument, I did a double take and thought that sounds blatantly wrong. But after thinking about it more carefully, I can see how it makes sense. And the way I imagined it is, well, this is how you explain it in the paper. And if you imagine a timeline, and at every point in time, the agent has some goal, and means rationality just says it ought to be taking the means to attain that goal. Then suppose as it goes along, it's got goal G1, and then at some specific time, let's call that time t, it changes it to G2. And then after that, it has goal G2. Then before time t, it has goal G1 and can take the means to attain G1. At time t, it's changed its goal, and so it has goal G2. And by changing its goal to G2, it was actually taking the means to attain G2. And then after time t, it has the goal G2 and can continue going on to take the means to attain goal G2. So actually, maybe I could restate that with apples and bananas.
But yeah, that's a good. This is a generally good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to the banana robot and whether it would change its goal to apples. Let's say at noon, it changes its goal from collecting bananas to collecting apples. Then before noon, it has the goal of collecting bananas, and means rationality just says it ought to take the means to attain bananas, and it can do that. And then at noon, it changes its goal to collecting apples, and at that point, it has the goal of attaining apples. So by changing its goal, it is actually taking the means to attain its goal at that time point. And then afternoon, it's wants to collect apples, and it can take the means to collect apples by collecting a bunch of apples. So at no point in time has it failed to take the means to attain the goal it has at that time. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. So the original formulation of the argument was a little more time based, and this is why it's called the timing problem. And we ended up changing the formulation a bit, but what you're saying, to be a little less timing focused, but what you're saying is exactly sort of in the spirit of what we're arguing, and it's maybe closer to the original formulation, but I still like it.
Okay. But it does sound like kind of a bonkers way to act.
Yeah, but then again, maybe sort of being obsessed with collecting bananas in itself, and never sort of changing our mind about it, to us seems bonkers. So I guess you might say, with the banana collecting goal, it's not necessarily so bonkers because it does have this goal to collect bananas. So that sort of makes its behavior sort of legible. If it has a goal to collect bananas and then suddenly switches for no reason to collecting apples, that might seem a bit harder to understand. And to be clear, we're not saying that's what will happen. What we're saying is just that that would not be sort of irrational from
Right.
sort of means rational perspective.
One of the objections you go into to your argument is the delay objection. Could you talk about what the delay objection is to your objection to the instrumental convergence thesis?
Yeah, so the delay objection points out that we might have been sort of treating goal change as this instantaneous thing, perhaps even something that just happens to the agent. Like the agent suddenly, like just immediately it switches to wanting to collect apples from collecting bananas. And then we might think in that kind of case, okay, yeah, there at no point is it sort of doing anything irrational, but it might be that changing your goal, especially when it requires a decision to change it, it's not an immediate process. And so you might be in this sort of this lag period where you've decided to change your goal, but it hasn't quite changed yet. And so even in just deciding to change your goal, you are not taking a means to a goal you still have. And so we have this example of this character named Marion who wants to paint the wall blue, and she has to press a button at noon in order to maintain her goal until the next day. If she doesn't press this button at noon, at midnight, she will lose her goal, and she knows this. And it's very easy for her to press the button. And we say she doesn't press the button. And so between noon and midnight, there's this period where she has not taken the means to achieve her goal of painting the wall blue, because she won't finish painting the wall blue because she didn't press this goal preserve button. And yes, she still has the goal of painting the wall blue. And she had that goal when she failed to press the button and could have. And so the delay objection is that, okay, there's at least this period where she is doing something irrational.
If I understand that correctly, in the example with the banana and apples robot, the action of changing your goal is assumed to be at the same instant as the goal changes. And so there's no time at which it's not
Right.
taking the means to attain its goal. But then if you separate these two events so that it takes the action to change its goal at this future point in time, then
Yeah.
at the time it's taken the action to change its goal, it still has the original goal. And so it
Yeah.
looks irrational to be doing that because that's not the means to
Right.
attaining the goal it has at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And this was the trickiest objection. And there was a point in sort of thinking about this and how to respond that I thought, oh, okay, actually, this is sort of devastating for the argument. But the response we came up with is that I guess we sort of shifted the argument a bit. And I know this from you pointed this out to me. I didn't notice the sort of shift we were making, but we make a sort of shift, which I think is consistent with the argument, but requires a sort of reformulation of the argument, which is that our point is that she never fails by a goal that she has by changing her goal. Changing her goal does not cause her to fail to achieve a goal that she has.
So
And
when she's
so,
painting the room blue and she fails to press the button to preserve her goal to paint the room blue, she does not, by doing that, at that moment, fail to paint the room blue.
exactly. Yeah, she still is like going ahead. She's still painting while she has the goal to paint the wall blue. Eventually, like eventually she will lose this goal and she will fail to paint the wall blue. But at that point, and this is another sort of trick. I don't think we need to explain this for the sake of the argument, but something that occurred to me is like, well, when does a goal fail? It's sort of unclear when exactly a goal fails, but we end up saying in the paper that it can't fail from her not having the goal while she still has the goal. And she still has the goal during this whole sort of period leading up to midnight when she loses the goal. And so at some point after she loses the goal, you can say, okay, well, she's failed to paint the wall blue, but it's no longer her goal to paint the wall blue. So she hasn't made some sort of mistake still. And so the way we phrase it in the paper is, so the timing problem argument is that by abandoning a goal, you do not thereby fail to take a means to achieve a goal that you have. But I think the delay objection, as you have pointed out to me, does show that that specific formulation is probably false. But a different way to formulate it would be that by abandoning a goal, you do not thereby fail to achieve a goal you have. And that, I mean, that's capturing, I think, like what is supposed to rationally matter anyway. And in that formulation, our response to the delay objection does go through, I think.
So to take stock, we've got these different kinds of rationality and inspected like whether the instrumental convergence thesis goes through under these different types of rationality. But another objection you address in the paper is, isn't this back to front? Shouldn't we first imagining that the AI has goals and then it's interested in different types of rationality only insofar as it helps it actually attain that goal? And if it does something bizarre like abandoning its goal, then can we really say that it had a goal in the first place?
Yeah. So we call this the goal first objection, and this is something that some philosopher named Marina Moreno pointed out to me. And the thought being that we're sort of presenting this AI that just wants to be rational. Like that's what it cares about is meeting rational requirements, and if it can abandon its goal while meeting rational requirements, then it could be fine with abandoning its goal, just so long as it doesn't behave irrationally. Marina's thought was, well, what an AI wants is to achieve its goal. Instrumental rationality is just a sort of tool for this thing that it wants to do. It's not simply trying to be instrumentally irrational. Instrumental rationality is, it's sort of derives its value from the goal itself. And what we say in the paper is that the goal first objection only makes sense if you think that having a goal is a reason to keep the goal. So we have this case of Marion again. She has this goal to paint the wall blue. This time there's no button or anything like that, but she randomly switches to having the goal of painting the wall red, and she paints the wall red. And then now that she has this new goal of painting the wall red, she has this option of pressing a button to change her goal back to painting the wall blue. And it seems there's no reason for her to press this button. So there was no reason for her to have the sort of painting the wall blue goal in the first place, because when she lost it, now this goal doesn't matter, which sort of reveals that the only reason she had to sort of pursue and achieve this goal is that she happened to have the goal. So we give this symmetry argument where we say, if the only reason that you have to pursue a goal is that you have that goal, then there's nothing sort of irrational about abandoning that goal. So we have the sort of future version of Marion who now has this sort of painting the wall red goal. She goes back in time to talk to the version of herself that had the painting the wall blue goal. That version of herself has nothing to say about why she should paint the wall blue instead of red, unless there's some sort of reason that having the goal gives you to keep the goal. Then the goal first objection isn't strong.
Let me see if I understand that. So the goal first objection is saying that you're imagining some rationality obsessed AI that is fine changing its goal so long as it obeys narrow scope means rationality. And it's a real stickler for that type of rationality. And if it can satisfy it while abandoning its goal, fine. And then that seems to contradict the idea that it really has a goal in the first place. It seems like it cares more about satisfying narrow scope means rationality than it does about actually pursuing its goal. And then your rebuttal to this is, again, with Marion painting the wall blue, you imagine she's like bonked on the head at some point and her goal flips to being red. And now she really wants to paint the room red. And the goal first objection says that, oh, she only cares about rationality insofar as it enables her to paint the room red. And then she sort of goes back in time and talks to her previous self, who is mad keen on painting the room blue. And there's sort of no reason she can convince herself that she ought to paint the room blue, even though the flip in her goal to painting the room red was arbitrary and wasn't rationally based at all. Have I understood that roughly correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
And then the idea is that because there is no rational justification for her keeping her goal now to be painting the room red.
Or any sort of justification at all.
Right. Okay, so it's not just rationality now, it's like
Any reason whatsoever. Like, she has no reason whatsoever other than the fact that she has the goal. So if there is a reason for her to achieve this goal, it is simply that it's the goal that she has.
right. Like the goal provides its own justification for preserving it.
Right. Yeah.
If you weren't going to preserve it, then, or if you didn't care about preserving it, then it's hard to say that you actually had a goal at all.
So that would be or that's a different way of defending the goal first objection. And I think that's sort of the stronger formulation of the goal first objection than we have in the paper. And I mean, I think our response to it would be basically similar, which is that, so we don't think our response to the goal first objection is decisive. So in the paper, we think what the goal first objection person is saying is that having a goal provides you a reason to pursue the goal. And we say, we don't think so. And so there's argument about whether just having an intention to do something provides you a reason to do that thing. And like John Broome will say no, and there's other people who say no, but some people might say yes. And we just, in the paper, we take the side of the people who say no, just having an intention to do something does not in itself give you a reason to do that thing. But there's a different way the goal first person could respond. And they could say, it is in the nature of having a goal that you just keep it and try to achieve it, unless there's some reason that comes up that sort of gives you some reason to abandon that goal. Just like if your only goal is collecting bananas, nothing else ever comes up that would sort of give you a reason to change your mind about that, like all the bananas disappear or something like this, then it's just in the nature of having that goal that this banana collecting AI will maintain that goal. And so we don't get into that. And I think that's a stronger formulation. But again, like what I'm working on next will be sort of trying to address that sort of objection. But in the paper, I think it's fine because we say, okay, like we don't have a decisive argument against this. But here's what the goal first objector needs to believe. And we find this sort of unintuitive. And maybe I also find it unintuitive that it's in the nature of having a goal that you don't abandon the goal no matter what, unless something comes up. Like I think you could have a goal to do something and then randomly change your mind for no reason later. I don't think that would violate the nature of having a goal. But more needs to be said about that. And we don't say that in the paper.
One response to the goal first objection might be, if simply having a goal gives a justification for preserving that goal, then the work of the Instrumental Convergence Thesis is all done right at the top when you assume that an AI has a goal. And so you don't need the Instrumental Convergence Thesis anymore.
Exactly. At least not when it comes to goal preservation. It would be, goal preservation would be completely redundant because the AI is not preserving the goal because that makes it better at achieving the goal. It's preserving the goal because that's what it means to have a goal. There's this blog called New Works in Philosophy that we wrote a summary of this paper for. They recently posted, because I realized this sort of maybe problem with the paper, and I fixed it for the summary. So I wrote the summary in a way that attributes to the goal first objector this other formulation, and then I sort of briefly respond to that in the summary. But that was sort of wishful thinking because we don't actually do that in the paper.
We'll point people to the summary at the end then, along with the paper.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll give you the link.
Your treatment of the delay first objection, that's why I said it changed my view so much at the beginning of the episode. Because while I was reading your paper before I properly understood it, I was screaming inside, being like, but that's what it means to have a goal. It's to preserve it.
Mhm.
It gives its own justification for preserving it. And that really clarified in my head, oh, I'm thinking about goals in quite a specific way. That means you don't need the instrumental convergence thesis at all.
Right, exactly. Yeah. At least not for goal preservation. Yeah.
One of the final parts of your argument is showing that once you lose goal preservation as one of the instrumental sub-goals, all the other instrumental sub-goals can start falling away as well. Could you explain how that works? Because that would seem to undermine the entire instrumental convergence thesis.
Yeah. So what it does is it makes them conditional on an agent having and preserving its goal, which we now say is less sort of certain or guaranteed. So assuming it does maintain its goal, then the other items on the instrumentally convergent goal list, these still, we think, hold. So
Hmm.
it will, as long as the AI expects to have a goal in the future that it's going to want to achieve, then it will still make sense for it to acquire resources or perfect its technology. But if the AI, it just decides to abandon its goal or thinks it's not going to have a goal in the future that it cares about, then it doesn't need to do the other things either.
I see. So if the AI decides to change its goal to something else, it will still need to be alive to pursue that goal. So the self-preservation sub-goal would still be there, but it might just
Yeah.
abandon its goal entirely and not replace it with another goal. And then it doesn't have an instrumental reason to stay alive.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So am I right in saying that the other sub-goals only fall away if the agent would abandon its goal entirely and all goals rather than change it to another goal?
At least from our argument, yes. I mean, there might be other arguments other people could make against some of these specific, um, like resource acquisition, but we don't make arguments against them. All we say is that our argument means these are conditional. Otherwise, they seem plausible to us. If an AI is going to have a goal, it does make sense, we think, to uh, get resources and so on.
Yeah, sure. I see. Okay, so to take stock, we've looked at these different types of rationality and whether the instrumental convergence thesis goes through under those. And zooming out a bit, the instrumental convergence thesis was an attempt to predict what a superintelligent AI might do, almost regardless of its makeup, just provided it has goals in it and it pursues some kind of rationality. But then the question is like, well, which type of rationality would the AIs we create have? Do you have a hunch for which whether it's likely to be ends rational or not, for example?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question. I mean these are sort of empirical questions that are hard to answer. I mean, so one thing people might say in the rationality literature is that wide scope rationality is way more popular than narrow scope rationality. Um,
Wide scope rationality is more popular in philosophy or AI?
no, it's more popular in sort of rationality literature than narrow scope by far. But then the one thing I think we discussed in the paper is that this seems to not be the case for AI discussions. The AI safety literature seems to be assuming narrow scope rationality, even though it doesn't sort of specify this. And was talking to a friend, Elliot Thornley, sort of about why this might be. And I think his thought was that, well, for one thing, it seems like we wouldn't want to develop an AI that doesn't maintain its goals. These sorts of AIs, at least if they showed goal abandonment tendencies early on, would get weeded out and not really pursued. And so maybe based on the sort of AIs we could see ourselves creating, the narrow scope rationality assumption made more sense. But yeah, if the rationality philosophers are correct, maybe the AI is more likely to accept wide scope rationality because that's more popular.
Well, you have this really nice analogy in the paper to morality. If you imagine a completely moral being, it does everything to the perfection of morality. Then if you can figure out what the truths are of morality, then you can make predictions about what this moral agent will do. The analogy then is if you imagine some super rational being that only acts in perfectly rational ways, then if you can figure out all the rules of rationality, then you can predict what this agent will do. So supposing AI researchers create a perfectly rational being, if we could just figure out whether ends rationality, means rationality, wide scope, narrow scope is the right form of
Yeah.
rationality, we'll be able to predict what it will do.
Yeah, although we would only be, depending on the form of rationality, it might sort of constrain how specific our predictions could be, because we don't know if it will sort of maintain its goals just based on the sort of rules of rationality. The rules of rationality maybe give enough leeway that this limits the sort of predictive abilities we would have if we knew exactly what the right form of rationality was, and that this AI agent would certainly follow that. But it might give us we might be able to predict certain things that wouldn't happen, like that it will maintain its goal but not collect resources or something like this. Yeah, there's some things we could predict, but maybe a lot we still wouldn't be able to.
The analogy with the moral agent again, I'm thinking like, okay, is it possible to create an agent that, on the one hand, is able to ascertain the truths of morality, and then, in addition, is also moved by those reasons? And it
Mm.
seems similar in AI that you could ask, like, hang on, we don't know all the rules of rationality or how to be perfectly rational. It seems kind of bonkers to assume both that we could create something that does that, and that once it discovers the laws of rationality, that it actually is moved. Like, wouldn't something have to move it to actually act in accordance with those?
Yeah, yeah, this is a question that I was thinking of getting into in the paper, like whether rationality is normative. And I mean, this sort of gets into the goal first objection, which is that the goal first objector might say, yeah, the rules of rationality will move the AI because it wants to achieve its goal. The rules of rationality will sort of help it be better at doing that. And so, because it has this sort of basic thing it wants to do, which rationality will help it to achieve, then it will sort of follow the rules of rationality that help it to achieve its goal. But this is assuming that having a goal provides a reason to keep it, or that it's in the nature of having a goal that you keep it.
Yeah, I think the papers made me realize that it's actually really important what kind of AI we produce, for whether the instrumental convergence thesis goes through, and in what kind of ways it would be worrying. And one reason to think that we will in fact create something that's means rational and not ends rational is like you said, it wouldn't be very useful if the AI started abandoning the goal we'd given it. If you imagine some CEO that's or some AI hedge fund that's been trained to maximize uh, arbitrage opportunities on the stock market, then if you've spent millions of pounds training this AI and then it suddenly thinks, hang on, I don't want to do that, or that's not a rational or good thing to do, then you're just going to delete that AI and start again until you end up with one that doesn't possess any ends rationality.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the instrumental convergence thesis is meant to sort of abstract away from these sort of empirical questions. But it's likely that, at least we have some reason to believe, that the sort of AI we create that eventually goes on to become a superintelligence, that however we sort of program it, that will have some sort of influence on what it is like in the future when it becomes a superintelligence. But that also can't be assured. That we don't know what happens in the sort of transition from sort of intelligent AI to super intelligent AI. It might just sort of be able to write the rules from scratch, ignore everything that we tried to put into it, and we don't know. And that's why the thesis is presented the way it is. Is we don't want to assume anything based on how we programmed it. At the same time, when we're thinking about these things, we're doing so in part to sort of figure out how we might try to influence it. So we are at least thinking we might be able to have some influence on it. And uh, I guess it would still be worth thinking about, even if we thought we had no influence on it, because then we still, I guess, have the choice about whether to create it at all or not, or whether to create something that will become a superintelligence at all or not. And that there's that sort of influence that we can have by preventing it from ever existing at all.
Yeah, if you discover that the only way to build it would be to build something dangerous, then you can just choose not to build it.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, that brings us on to the hope question. Has your study of the instrumental convergence thesis made you more or less hopeful overall?
Yeah, it's a really tough question. So in the paper, we sort of take a, I think, sort of mixed stance. And so I think along with Tochnig, he's the philosopher who wrote Fully Autonomous AI, who thinks that sort of the ability to change goals is dangerous. We definitely see some possible danger there, but it also gives us some hope in the sense that if we were able to influence the goals of a superintelligence, if it weren't just totally out of our hands, if our argument is correct, maybe a superintelligence would be less likely to resist having its goals changed because it would sort of see, well, this isn't going to cause me to fail to achieve any goal I have. If they sort of go ahead and change my goals, I only have this goal because I'm only pursuing this goal because I happen to have it. If they give me a new goal, that's the goal I'll happen to have. And then I can pursue that. And so it maybe makes us more optimistic about cordability. The most hopeful vision that you could have from this is that as a sort of default, maybe it will pursue the goals that it has, but it won't resist external actors coming in and changing its goals. That would be the sort of best case scenario. And it's not guaranteed by our argument, but it sort of, our argument, I think, gives a sort of space for that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, can we learn anything from the human case here? If a brain surgeon came to me and said, "I'm going to change your goal tomorrow to make you obsessed with paper clips," I wouldn't think, "Oh well, then tomorrow I'll enjoy paper clips and I'll collect those, and that'll be great." I would think, "No, screw that, get away from me."
Yeah, I mean, so, but there might be a lot of other things going. So, for one thing, you might be ends rational. And you might think that that's just not a good thing to do. And so we consider one of the counter arguments in the paper that we consider is the Yukowski Gandhi example, which is you offer Gandhi. So Gandhi is a peaceful person. We could say he has a goal never to kill anyone. You offer him a pill that will sort of remove his goal not to kill anyone. And if he takes this pill, he's more likely to kill people in the future. Now, uh, Gandhi doesn't want to kill people, even though he realizes that he won't mind killing people later. At the time he's killing them, if he takes this pill, he still doesn't want to take it. That's maybe sort of getting to your paperclip example a little bit, um, and And so our argument to that is that, well, Gandhi here is being sort of ends rational. Gandhi thinks a murder is wrong, or it's a bad thing to do. And you might think creating paper clips is just a sort of waste of time compared to other sort of more important things you could be doing. And it also, from your current perspective, admittedly, it seems you're very, very alienated from thinking that that's a worthwhile thing to do. Um, but I would say there's other things going on other than the fact that it just doesn't happen to be your goal to create paper clips now. I think you probably are attached to the goals that you have for maybe thicker reasons than them just happening to be your preferences. But then we also consider sort of nihilistic Gandhi, who admits, okay, yeah, I don't want to murder, but it just happens to be a preference that I have. Um, and I don't think murder is wrong. I don't think anything is wrong. I have this preference and I want to keep this preference. And so we admit maybe Gandhi and nihilistic Gandhi also wouldn't take the pill, but we just say he wouldn't be doing anything irrational and taking the pill. And so in your case, I think we just have to bring in a lot more assumptions, but let's just say if you believed that, maybe you're a nihilist and you think that pursuing paper clips is just as good as or just as sort of like worthless or neutral as anything else you could be doing. Instead, it's just that you happen to have this preference for doing the things that you do as opposed to making paper clips. Then I would say, yeah, I mean, I can understand why you don't want the surgery, but I don't think you'd be making some sort of rational mistake in getting the surgery if you thought, well, any goal is as good as any other. It just so happens that I don't care about paper clips at the moment, and I know that I will after the surgery, and that's sort of like alienating to me now. I think you should just be able to recognize, well, um, it's no better or worse than what I'm currently doing, because nothing is. And I'll recognize that. Like, I'll be happy. I'll be fine with it once after the surgery.
Right. So my surgery example, I've smuggled in some ends rationality without admitting it.
Exactly.
And then we've already seen that if an agent is ends rational, then it might change its goal. But
Right.
it doesn't then follow that it would be happy with humans changing its goal to whatever we want. In fact, quite the opposite. It says it might resist that.
Yeah. Well, right. So if the AI is ends rational and we're trying to change its goal to something that it thinks is irrational or bad, yeah, no, I think that our argument doesn't say anything about that, but I think that that would be a harder case. What we're considering is an agent that pursues its goal simply because it's the goal it has. It doesn't say this is right. This is what anyone should be doing. I would be doing the wrong thing if I weren't doing this thing. We're just assuming it's pursuing this thing simply because that's its goal. It knows that if it were to have some other goal, then it would pursue that, and that wouldn't be sort of wrong or something like that. Then we think at least rationality would not be getting in the way of allowing us to change its goal.
Okay, I think I'm still about as worried about AI as I was
Yeah,
before, but
yeah,
certainly for different reasons, and it's reshaped the debate in my head quite a lot. So and built a richer picture of what I think having a goal means. So I'm grateful for that, and I really enjoyed reading the paper.
great.
So the paper is called A Timing Problem for Instrumental Convergence by Rhys Southan, Helen Ward, and Jan Semler. Really encourage you to check it out. There's so much rich argument in there that we didn't have a chance to cover. And Rhys, you said there was also a summary. Where can people find that?
Yeah, New Works in Philosophy. It's a Substack that posts summaries of philosophy articles. Currently, I think ours is the most recent, and in that sort of summarized version, I changed the argument a little bit to sort of raise the objection to one of our arguments in a sort of better way. But yeah, that might be a good sort of place to start to just get a sense of what the article is about.
Yeah, I'll link it to the show notes. Encourage people to check it out. And where else can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
Um, I think I'm eventually going to start a Substack. Or as I've been pursuing my PhD, I've been sort of quiet online. I haven't been sort of writing sort of too much for the public, but eventually that's going to change. But um, yeah, I guess you can look out in the future for an eventual Substack from me, probably.
All right, my guest has been Rhys Southan, DPhil at Oxford University. Thanks so much for coming on, Rhys.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.